Hello again, this is Paul Norell, and today I'd like to take a look at a strategy board game called Colonial. Now, Colonial is a board game of colonial expansion. It was designed by Christophe Pont and published by Stratagem Games, and it's the second edition which I'm going to be looking at here. Now, Colonial was originally designed as a 2 to 6 player game, with each player assuming the role of a major colonial power spanning approximately the 15th to 18th centuries. The winner being the player who first achieves 10 prestige points. Now, these are achieved by exploration, colonization, creating major cities, winning wars, and even circumnavigating the globe. And the mechanics are incorporated into a deck of cards, one for each player, depicting officers, each of which are responsible for particular actions. So, for example, the scientist card is required to obtain advances in know-how. The explorer card is needed to explore new territory. The merchant to transport goods, and so on. Now, the player has to select 5 of his cards and place them in order at the start of a turn. He then has to play these cards in the order selected. He can't change his mind. However, because each card features 2 personalities or offices, he can, when playing the card, decide which of the 2 he will use at that particular moment. Now, the second edition of the game introduced an important distinction by providing a more historical perspective. The players now assume the roles of specific nations, namely Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and the United Provinces. Now, these 5 nations each have their own set of victory conditions and their deck of cards, but the 6th deck of cards is now distributed among the other 5 to provide each nation with special advantages. Britain gains an extra financier, Spain an additional missionary, Portugal a second explorer, France an extra sovereign, and the Dutch another merchant. Now, I created a player aid which shows how the different nations will be competing for some of the same territory and resources, and this can be downloaded from BGG. Now, let's take a closer look at the game and how it works, and we'll start with the board, which in my view is a masterpiece of artwork. It has to be one of the best designed boards of any game I've come across. You could just look at the board itself for ages and take in all the details. It's fabulous. In fact, it was seeing the image of the board that convinced me to get the game in the first place. Now, there you can see there's a track for each of the advances in logistics, economy, trade, seafaring, loans, navy, and diplomacy. Each of the territories, you'll see, displays a number. Now, this is the total required on the dice to successfully explore that territory. Now, you have 10 dice, each of which has a wreath displayed on 2 faces, and you must roll the required number of wreaths to achieve success. So each die has a 1 in 3 probability of coming up with the goods. So, for example, if I wanted to explore West Africa, I would need 3 wreaths to succeed. Now, the territory also displays the particular resources that you can obtain from it, and they all are color-coded with the appropriate symbol. Now, West Africa, for example, has gold and slaves. And if you're the only player possessing these resources, you get a monopoly, which entitles you to increase the size of your merchant fleet and can affect the player turn order as well. Lastly, each side has a player mat which shows its treasury, its victory points, merchant and naval fleets, and everything is denoted by the coloured discs, which are also used to mark the status on the board tracks as well, and control of monopolies and territories. What I'd like to do now is play through the first turn, just to give you an idea of how things work. Let's start with the setup. Now you'll see that every nation starts with its discs in each of the advanced boxes. Logistics, for example, denotes how many resources you can place into a territory at any time. France and the Dutch start with 2, while Portugal is limited as it can only ever have a logistics level of 1, so it can't advance any further. The economy track indicates how many goods can be transferred from the market into your own revenue at any time, and the Dutch, as you can see, start on level 4. Now by playing the scientist card, you can progress to the next box on any of these tracks by paying that amount from your treasury. So you need 4 treasury markers, for example, to move to box 4 on this track. Each nation begins at level 0 in seafaring. Now each level attained allows you to subtract 1 from the dice roll required to explore a territory. So for example, West Africa would normally require 3 reeds on the dice, but with a seafaring level of 1 it would require only 2. The naval track is pretty important because this determines by how much you can increase your navy at the end of each turn. And it's often the first advance that players will put their resources into. Remember, you can only use the scientist card once each turn, and if you start falling behind with your naval construction, you very soon become a target for more aggressive opponents. The diplomacy track determines with whom you can be at war. You can only declare war on nations that occupy the same or lower level on the track than yourself, so it's one way of keeping out of trouble. You go down 1 level on the track every time you break a monopoly or declare war, and you go up 1 level whenever you use the ambassador card. Starting treasury, merchant and naval fleets are shown on the player mats. Now Spain begins with a larger treasury and merchant fleet because at the start of the game's time frame she was the most significant colonial power. So for the first turn, player order is determined randomly, but thereafter the player with the most monopolies will go first, and in the case of a tie, the order just moves to the next player in a clockwise direction. So let's start. Player order has been determined randomly, and all nations have selected 5 cards from their deck of 7 to play for the first turn. Incidentally, if you can only play less than 5 cards, well, then you can choose when to play and when to pass. Now, to reflect particular historical circumstances, certain nations are restricted in what they can do for the first few turns. And you may wonder whether this puts them at a disadvantage, but I can assure you that I have actually played this game and won it on several occasions with each individual nation. First up is France, who can't use its explorer, viceroy or conqueror personality for the first 2 or 3 turns, so it plays an ambassador card for its first action and rises to the top of the diplomatic track. Britain can't explore in turn 1, so uses the scientist card to pay 2 resources from the treasury and increase its naval construction level to 2. The Dutch can only use scientist, merchant or trader for the first 3 turns, so also plays the scientist card to increase its naval potential. Now Portugal starts with an early advantage because it has 2 explorer cards. But the problem is that if Portugal gets too much of a lead, it immediately becomes the target for its opponents. So one strategy is not to stick your neck out too early on. Notwithstanding that, the Portuguese are going to get stuck into exploration, and they successfully explore West Africa. And they get a prestige point, and they now have a choice. They can occupy the territory with one of the resources, either by placing a disc from their merchant fleet, which establishes a trading post, or from their treasury, which is a more aggressive action and therefore stimulates native unrest. Now, Portugal does not want to reduce its merchant fleet at this stage, so takes a disc from the treasury, claims the gold resource, and also places an unrest marker. Portugal now has a gold monopoly, as shown here. And by the way, the two discs for the Dutch there represent the fact that at the start of the game they automatically have two monopolies. Last to go are the Spanish, and they play a scientist card, and by paying 2 treasury resources they increase their logistical capability. That is the number of resources that can be placed into any location at any one time. Second round now, and France plays the scientist, pays 2 treasury to keep up with Britain and the Dutch in the naval race. Britain plays an ambassador to join France at the top of the diplomatic track, and the Dutch, with only 4 cards they can play this turn, choose to pass this round. The Portuguese use their second explorer to gain access to Angola. Now you can see that the required number is 4 and they only rolled 3. However, they can deduct 1 for each adjacent territory which they occupy, so are successful. The slave monopoly is gained and another unrest marker is placed. The Spanish reach out to the Americas and explore the West Indies. The number required is 3, but as this is the first attempt to explore the continent, there is a +2 modifier. Spain makes this roll with 5, places a resource marker and unrest marker on the territory, and takes the tobacco monopoly. In addition, Spain gets a bonus prestige point for being the first to explore the New World. So at the end of the round, Portugal and Spain both have 2 prestige points. Spain has 1 monopoly and Portugal has added a second. The fact that Portugal and Spain do well at the start of the game is a reflection of the fact that they were initially the 2 greatest maritime powers, who only later on were challenged by the British, Dutch and French. It's the third round and the French play a merchant card. Now with this action you can either transport your own goods to market from your occupied territories, or you can be a carrier for another power. The French don't have any resources on the board as yet, but they can offer to transport another player's goods up to the limit of their own merchant fleet. Portugal agrees to the trade, so France places 2 of its own goods in the market, and at the same time the Portuguese receive 2 treasury resources for having their goods conveyed from Angola. In this way, players can acquire revenue by allowing their goods to be transported by another. And the British and Dutch decide to do exactly the same thing and play their merchant cards as well. Portugal and Spain both benefiting from the trade. Portugal now plays a Viceroy card, which allows resources to be placed into an explored territory up to the limit of your logistics, which in Portugal's case is 1. Now you can see that Spain has a logistics level of 2 and plays its Viceroy to place 2 resources into West Africa. Now by taking the slave resource here, Spain breaks Portugal's monopoly and is reduced by 1 level on the diplomacy track. The trader card, which France plays at the beginning of the 4th round, allows those goods already in the market to be converted to treasury up to the limit of your economy. Again, you can also convert another player's goods with their permission. The French economy is at level 2, which is enough to allow the goods in the market to be transferred. Britain performs the same action to convert its goods to treasury, while the Dutch, whose economy is at level 4, can transport all 4 of its goods. Portugal now has enough resources in Angola to found a colony. Now you need the number of resources equal to the native figures displayed on the board. A colony marker is placed and another prestige point gained. Spain also founds a colony in the Caribbean and gains a prestige point. France performs its final action for the turn by joining the naval race. Britain, the Dutch Republic and Portugal pass. And Spain plays a governor card to pay treasury up to its economic limit and place a booming city at Santo Domingo in the West Indies, earning another prestige point. Now, at the end of each turn, a player can increase the size of its merchant fleet by transferring a treasury marker for each monopoly that it owns. So here you can see the Dutch can increase theirs by 2 and Portugal and Spain by 1 apiece. Now with the most monopolies, the Dutch will go first in the next turn. 4 of the powers can increase their navy by 2, transferring from the treasury to the navy box, while Spain can only increase by 1. Now Spain has raced ahead with 4 prestige points, but under the historical variant rules, it must now either spend 1 treasury for each prestige point or lose 1 prestige point. So Spain opts for the former course and reduces its treasury by 4. Well, there we are. I hope that this has given you a taste for what this great game can deliver. There's plenty of interaction, with players ganging up on each other to wage war or foment rebellion in the colonies. I've really only touched the surface. If you enjoy this period of history, then this game is for you, especially if you use the historical variant. As always, I shall say goodbye and thanks for watching.